go. Now, I do think it's very important that yesterday President Trump said in a message to the Iranian people, like, you can be free now. You need to stand up. You need to take back your government. He told Iranian soldiers, you need to lay down your arms. If you don't, you will be killed. But it's not clear how the U.S. and President Trump intend to accomplish that for Iran. The strikes from the air have been very successful, but most military experts do not believe that it's going to be possible to completely decapitate the regime and force regime change without boots on the ground or some opposition inside Iran that is armed and trained and can take over security for Iran. At this point, we don't have either of those things, and it's not clear we have a plan for either of those things.
You know, Iran's foreign minister just is sharing a statement from earlier this morning stating that a new supreme leader will be chosen in 1 to 2 days. And I have to imagine that that person, may not be in place for very long. But what does this signal to you? Obviously, the supporters of the former supreme leader want the regime to stay on course. And now we have President Trump, who's continuing to encourage the people of Iran to rise up and take over the government. Unclear, though, as to exactly how realistic that is. When you talk about those two opposing forces, though, how does this play out?
Well, this is going to be very interesting who Iran chooses, because from their perspective, they need to choose very wisely someone who has the support of Iranians and those Iranians that support the regime, and particularly the key regime members, because at this point, with many of the leaders in Iran having been taken out, the leadership could fall apart. There could be feuds between leaders. And so picking someone who has full support will be important for the future of the regime if the goal of the regime is to last and exist, which I believe it is. And so we have some intelligence on the potential successors to Khamenei, but we don't know who it will be, and we'll need to watch very closely. They're also going to be very worried about, like you said, that he may be taken out by the U.S. and Israel as well. So that person likely will be in hiding somewhere different from the places that Khamenei was hiding, because we know that intelligence for Iran was compromised. That's how the U.S. and Israel discovered where Khamenei was, and that he was having a meeting with other leaders, and how they successfully took out so many Iranian leaders. So protection of that person is going to be important as well. Maybe we don't see public addresses from him because he's in hiding.
And let's talk about that as well, because, Iran is surrounded by U.S. allies. When we take a look at this region of the world in terms of the next person to assume power, how do the other countries surrounding Iran factor in, if at all?
Well, having the other countries around Iran and in the Middle East is important for the U.S. and for Israel, because it shows broader support within the region, and it will also be helpful to whatever comes next in Iran. But remember, many of the countries that are participating, in fact, all of them, are historically enemies of Iran. These are Sunni-dominated countries with monarchies that are and Sunni majorities or Sunnis in the lead. So there have been tensions for many years between those countries and Iran. But I don't want to minimize the importance of having Gulf countries. And I would also say it's really historic that now some Gulf countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait are fighting on the same side as Israel, perhaps even cooperating, doing intelligence sharing with Israel. So that's a very important development too. I would also just mention that Iraq is in a bit of a different place, because Iraq is a Shia-led country with a majority Shia population. There are close ties, especially between southern Iraq and Iran. So Iraq is sort of on the sidelines. There have been protests in Iraq. There have been protests at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. So it will also be interesting to watch what Iraq does.